Almost heaven, West Virginia, Blue Ridge Mountains, Shenandoah River. Life is all there, older than the trees, younger than the mountains, blowing like the breeze. Country roads, take me.
But when the fighting is stopped and the fallout has settled, you must rebuild.
I belong, West Virginia, Mountain Mama, take me home, country roads, take me home, country roads.
In Vault 76, our future begins.
Hello and welcome. This is going to be the second video that I'm doing on Fallout, the video game franchise. The last video I made a chocolate spicy bundt cake from this book called the Fallout Vault Dwellers Official Cookbook. And today I'm going to be making MOLERAT Manicotti. I have some opinions about this recipe, and then I have some substitutions that I'm going to be using. I'm going to start with making the manicotti pasta. Now, obviously, you can buy your own in the store manicotti shells. They're just like round tubes that you fill with stuff. However, I'm going to be using my favorite fresh egg pasta recipe and then rolling them out into sheets and then working that way. My favorite fresh egg pasta recipe comes from the Washington Post. I'll put the source of it in the description below. Before we get into the ingredients and such, I want to talk about this cookbook. This specific recipe, MOLERAT sausage manicotti. If you're not familiar with the Fallout series, it's a post-apocalyptic where nuclear bombs were dropped on the United States and time pretty much stood still from the 50s. And it's all about living and surviving in an apocalyptic world. When I play the game and I collect the food items that then I take to my cooking station in the game, oftentimes I think like, why haven't they made this into a recipe? Or why isn't this ingredient in the recipe? And the next video, if I do a third video, I will be making up my own Fallout recipe based on ingredients that are actually available, because I just want to talk about the dairy products in this. And to me, they seem excessive. So from the top to the bottom, let's go. There's a third cup of grated Parmesan, a half a cup of soft goat cheese, 3.5 cups of ricotta cheese, a half a cup of cream cheese, 1 cup of shredded fontina cheese, and 2 cups of shredded mozzarella. There is also heavy cream in the recipe in addition to that. That's unrealistic amounts of dairy in a post-apocalyptic world. Now, having just tasted a little of that bundt cake recipe is solid and good. I have no doubt that this recipe will be very tasty. But if you're really looking for like that authentic Fallout cooking experience, I don't think the MOLERAT sausage manicotti, because that's what the ingredient substitution is. We're not going to be using MOLERAT today. At the end of the day, it doesn't seem to be like entirely based on the gaming experience, which I was hoping. But I didn't buy this cookbook. This was gifted to me 7 or 8 years ago. And this is the week I finally make recipes from it. Because as I mentioned in the last video, in the middle of April, the new Fallout TV series on Amazon Prime comes out, and this is part of my celebration of that because I have been waiting ever since I heard about it was coming out, and they just dropped the official trailers last week, and I am super excited. We're gonna get started on this MOLERAT manicotti recipe, like I said, with making fresh pasta. So let's get started with that. You start with 2 cups of all-purpose flour. Put about 1/4 cup aside for a little bit later. And you combine that with 1 tablespoon of semolina flour and 1/2 teaspoon of fine salt. You mix them in the food processor or in the mixer. I'm choosing to do this all by hand. 3 extra large eggs lightly beaten. And we'll start with 1 tablespoon of oil. Now you don't want to overwork this too much because the more you work flour, the more you're going to develop the gluten. You just want to get it just mixed enough so it resembles small curds. It should Form a soft ball. And if it seems a little bit dry, just add a little bit more of the olive oil, up to 1 tablespoon. If it seems too sticky, then add more flour. I prefer to do this by hand. You could do it in a mixer. I like to be able to feel it because that's how I know when it gets to the point it needs to be. Now we're gonna spread a little bit of flour on the table. And working with pasta dough is just a little bit different than working with bread dough. A little bit more crumbly. You do not want to form a gluten window. So basically you want to bring this together to form a rough mass and then knead it for several minutes, getting as much of this flour incorporated as possible. And you want to form a smooth, tight ball. I do feel like this is just a little too dry. Add a little bit more of the oil. Now, if you don't like this recipe, you can use whatever recipe that you normally use or whatever recipe you find online. Just make sure that it's been tested because the internet these days is full of a lot of recipes that do not work. Fresh pasta is a bit of a labor of love, but I can guarantee you it's worth every single second of it. So as you can see, it's starting to come together a little bit better. Just let that sit for just 1 minute and then do some cleanup and just let it rest because it's very tough. It just needs a minute or two. While you're letting that rest, just start getting ready for the big part of this and grab yourself in like a 9x13 pan. All right, get back to it. Now this can take some time. Now you'll cover this in plastic wrap or some other sort of airtight food wrap, and then you'll just set it aside for 20 to 30 minutes and just let it rest. While that is set aside, go ahead and get all your ingredients together for the rest of the manicotti. Let's take a look at this recipe. So of these ingredients, I opted to skip the pine nuts because quite honestly, this recipe became very expensive with all the dairy products. I actually wouldn't recommend this to you if you're trying to save money on groceries because, like, for instance, this fontina cheese, this on its own was almost $6 just for this one cheese. And like I mentioned at the beginning, there is a lot of cheese in this recipe. So I've opted to skip the pine nuts. And also as far as ricotta cheese goes, I didn't grow up eating a lot of Italian based foods, but I do remember for the very longest time I didn't know that lasagna wasn't made with cottage cheese in place of ricotta. So I do quite often substitute out ricotta for cottage cheese, and I do have a lasagna recipe coming up that is the best lasagna I ever made in my life, and I substituted out the ricotta for this cottage cheese. If you've never had good culture cottage cheese, you have to try this one. It is my very favorite cottage cheese. I've always loved cottage cheese, but now I won't eat any cottage cheese but this because the texture is great, the flavor is great. It's not as liquidy as some cottage cheeses. It's got a superior flavor and it's got great ingredients. So I'm replacing the 3.5 cups of ricotta cheese with 2 cups of good culture cottage cheese. And that's because I didn't have enough. So hopefully it'll turn out. I'm sure it'll be fine. There's plenty of other cheeses in it. If I do this kind of recipe again, obviously I'll make sure I have enough cottage cheese on hand. Back to the recipe. 3 Italian sausages removed from their casings, cooked and roughly chopped. Essentially, you want to get your favorite kind of Italian sausage and then just squeeze it out of the casing. We'll save that for later. This recipe boosts 1+ intelligence for 1 hour in your specials. Its difficulty level is hard. Prep time is 1 hour, cook time is 1 hour. It serves 7 and it pairs well with French bread. So the proper way to clean parsley, you can use any sort of cloth that your parsley can fit in. So you put it in there and you'll take it to the sink. You want to get this as wet as possible and then you start squeezing it out. But this isn't a professional kitchen and I hate doing this. But that is the proper way to wash parsley as they teach you in culinary school. Keep rinsing and twisting and squeezing until the water that comes out runs clear. And then you should have some nice clean parsley. Now this also calls for 2 ounces of fresh basil. What do we got here? The recipe calls for 2 ounces or 25 grams of fresh basil, and I'm trying to work out how this is a thing. This is 0.75 ounces, less than half of what is required in the recipe, but it's also 21 grams, which is almost what is needed in the recipe. So I would say just use your judgment. If you don't like basil, don't use as much basil or any basil at all. If you can't afford basil, use dried basil, which, let's be honest, in a recipe based in the post-apocalyptic world, dried basil is probably easier to come by than fresh basil. Oh, but the basil smells so good. does not say whether or not we should chop the basil up, which is odd. If you want to make a stock or you want to infuse something with basil, save your stems and you can reuse them somewhere else in the kitchen. Best way to do a zero waste kitchen project. All right, I'm just gonna rough chop these up. So we're using all of that, and then we've got 1/3 cup of Parmesan cheese. Let's show you a quick, fast way to chop some garlic. Now, the easiest way to get the garlic out of the paper is to take the edge of your knife and smash. And then it's way easier to peel the garlic. Now, this recipe calls for 6 garlic cloves. I'm using 6, but they're very large, which might be too much garlic. Yes, there is a such thing as too much garlic. So again, you just put it down on the table, you smash it, and you pop it right out. Smash it, pop it. Smash it, pop it. Now, when it comes to garlic, the more surface exposure there is, the stronger the garlic flavor. You want to expose all the cells, and I'm just going to do a rough chop today. It actually doesn't tell you what to do with the garlic in the recipe. I'm passing on this last garlic because this is very, very strong smelling, and I don't want to overpower the dish with garlic. And 1/4 cup of olive oil. Now we're going to set that aside because it has to go into a food processor later, and I'm not ready to pull a food processor out, but you can get this prepared in advance and just set it aside. And because you'll be adding the goat cheese and the ricotta or cottage cheese, if that's what you're using, to that mixture after it's been pulsing, just take those 2 ingredients and set them off to the side with the other ingredients for later. Now we're going to go to the stove and we're going to cook those sausages. Choose the size of pan you're comfortable with. Just add a little oil into that pan. Squeeze the meat out of the casings. You could use ground beef if you don't like Italian sausage. You could use any sort of minced meat product that you feel like you want to eat. If you've got access to MOLERAT, why not? All right, now you've got meat. And then just fucking toss it in and get it going. And just break it up into little pieces. Now you can hear that that is not a happy pan. You want to turn down that heat so it doesn't make quite as much of a sound. Now, one of the things that I learned in culinary school that I always keep in the back of my mind is that your food talks to you when you cook. So when you put it in a hot pan like that and it makes a lot of noise, that's not happy food. You don't want it to be spitting hot unless the recipe calls for spitting hot. So always make sure that you're adjusting your temperature and listening to your food. You want to make sure to break all of the meat up into the smallest sized pieces as possible. To the cooked Italian sausage, you want to add the parsley and the oregano and stir to combine, and then season with salt and pepper and set it aside. Take another large saucepan over medium heat, adding the butter and the cream cheese. Heat until the butter is melted and the cream cheese is soft. Pour half of the marinara into the pot and mix until combined. Add the fontina and heavy cream and heat until the cheese melts. Add the remaining marinara and simmer for 10 minutes and turn off the heat and set aside. And now let's go to the blender. Okay, so back to this. Obviously, don't forget to put your your blade in there before you put the food in there. So I'm just gonna move this stuff aside and hopefully make this work, but also be careful because these ninja blades are super sharp. The first time I ever used it, I cut my finger real nice and good. Here's the thing. It's too big. The blades can't get to make it smooth. So I'm just gonna go ahead and add the cottage cheese or ricotta and the goat cheese, and then there should be enough in it to blend it up. It doesn't work, it's chunky. It's gonna be edible. I cannot even explain to you how delicious this kitchen smells right now. Anyway, I'm just gonna throw the cheese in there and blend it all together right now. It called for 1/2 cup of goat cheese. I think this is a little bit more than 1/2 cup, but since I didn't use enough ricotta, or rather cottage cheese in my case, I'm just gonna put all of what's left in there, and that's gonna have to work for today. Let's see if this works. I'm gonna set that aside, and then we're gonna get started on rolling out that pasta, because then once the pasta is done, then becomes assembly. All right, take your dough, cut it into 4 pieces. Put the 3 pieces aside, keep it covered for later. Cover it for later because it will dry out very, very fast. Start it on a 1. You'll take a little bit of that semolina, just sprinkle it on a cutting board or the table, give it a little semolina, and then fold it into book thirds, and then run it through the other way, and then fold it again, and then rotate it and run it. And then just do like that, and do like that. Repeat with your remaining pieces of dough. Go back to 1. Right, it's time for assembly. All right, per instructions. 1 cup of sauce at the bottom. So the next step is gonna be to fill the manicotti. What I could do is make giant pan-sized manicotti, square off the ends, and you can save all these little bits and then cut them up smaller and use them in a soup or just make another pasta dish. They dry really well and they store pretty well too. Ah, I did something wrong. Let's open this up. We'll make do. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. I do have to say that this recipe, not super awesome with instructions. We were supposed to take this mixture and pour it into the meat mixture. So let's do that. I am making a mess. Let's try this again. This time with what's supposed to be in the pasta. This is a mess. This is a mess. Okay, fixed. Okay, so like 1 recipe of pasta dough should be enough. I'm gonna just mash it in there, pour the remaining sauce over the top. See, this is why it doesn't matter. No one's gonna know what's under there. Final touch, mozzarella cheese. And obviously if you want more mozzarella on here, you can go for it, but there's a lot of dairy in here like I've mentioned, and I don't know if your stomach's gonna appreciate that so much. So it says to bake uncovered for 30 to 45 minutes. Place this on a pan just in case it bubbles over, because cleaning cheese and dairy products out of your stove, not cool. So just put it in the oven and set the alarm for 45 minutes. All right, time to taste the MOLERAT manicotti. I can just smell the garlic though. It's very strong. I think honestly, if you wanted to make this without the MOLERAT or any meat at all, I think it would be fantastic done that way. It's very, very rich and very, very cheesy and dairy-like. Well, there's a little bit of the fennel from the Italian sausage. That's beautiful. So this recipe, I recommend. I'd probably rewrite it for some people. I didn't find it to be the easiest recipe to follow, but I also don't follow recipes that often because I can usually whip up whatever I want to eat without a recipe. But sometimes it's good to practice following recipes. Really, my excitement for the new follow video is why I made this recipe and the spicy chocolate bundt cake recipe that's also on this channel now from this book by Victoria Rosenthal, Fallout: The Vault Dweller's official cookbook. 2 recipes that I've done for this are good. However, like I said earlier in this video, or I can't remember if it was the other video, some of them I don't think are like Fallout enough. And so I'm gonna be creating some of my own Fallout recipes, more based heavily on the things that you can pick up in the game to cook with. I love Fallout. If you've never played any of the Fallout games, I highly recommend them. Fallout 76 is an online multiplayer role-playing game. My favorite games tend to be apocalypse-based, first-person shooter-based, crafting, and role-playing. So obviously, Fallout has been my very favorite gaming series. If you're interested in coming to find me in the wasteland, my PlayStation Gamer Tag is right here on the screen. Just beware, just because it's a open world multiplayer, I am very antisocial in that game, and chances are I will run away from you if you approach me. I only play with the mic on when it is requested, so if you're trying to talk to me, you won't get a response, but I will be able to hear you. I hope you liked this video. I hope you check out the new Fallout series on Amazon Prime. The aesthetic of the game is amazing. The gameplay is really good. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so. If you liked what you saw here today, please leave me a message in the comment section below. If you are familiar with this cookbook and there's something in it that you'd like me to try, please let me know. I always love to take suggestions on things to do. I want to thank my friend Joe for suggesting the MOLERAT Manicotti recipe in this video today. Thank you for stopping by my video. As always, have a wonderful day, and maybe I'll see you in the wasteland. What are you doing? Oh, did you find some, oh, hi. Did you find some parsley? No, don't eat the parsley. No, don't eat the parsley. It's been a while since you've been in the kitchen with me. Yes, it has. Yes, hi. 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 Hey, mister. Say hi to the internets. Say, hey, my bladder is much better now, but still not great. GPG. Oh, it says it belly rubbins? Is it belly rubbins time? Huh? No, Mama's in the kitchen cooking. Can't be getting your hair all over my hands. Can't get your hair all over my hands. Okay. It's a good boy. Mama's gotta go back to the cooking. He's a good boy.